Picture a family standing at the edge of everything they have ever known. Behind them, grasslands turning to dust, a river running thinner each season, the only world their ancestors have inhabited for 250,000 years. Ahead, nothing they recognize, no paths, no stories about what lies beyond the horizon. And yet, at some point, they walked forward anyway. We think of migration today as a decision. A plane ticket, a border, a choice made with maps and information. But for the first humans to leave Africa, there was no map. There was only hunger, or curiosity, or desperation, pushing a handful of people toward a horizon that had swallowed everyone who tried before them. Because here is the strange part. They weren't the first to try. Fossil evidence in Israel suggests small groups left Africa over 100,000 years ago and vanished. No descendants, no trace, which raises a harder question than why did they leave? If dozens of these journeys had already failed, disappearing into deserts and ice ages without leaving a single mark on the human story, why did one, and only one, succeed so completely that its descendants now cover every continent on Earth? By the end of this film, you'll understand what made that one migration different, and why that difference still lives inside almost every human body alive today. To understand how radical this was, you have to understand how good Africa actually was at keeping people alive. It offered a staggering range of climates and food sources: savanna, coastline, forest, wetland, a continent generous enough that humans had no evolutionary need to leave it. Stepping outside it meant walking into landscapes with no proven safe route, no known edible plants, no certainty of water. Anthropologists studying the roots out of Africa describe crossing the Arabian Peninsula in this era as functionally crossing an ocean of sand, a corridor with almost no margin for error. To leave was not bold. It was closer to suicidal, unless something changed the odds, and something did change. For decades, the dominant story was simple. One small band left Africa around 60 to 70,000 years ago, and everyone outside Africa descended from them. It was tidy and largely correct in its genetic conclusion, but archaeology kept complicating it. Stone tools uncovered at Jebel Faya, in what is now the United Arab Emirates, have been dated to roughly 125,000 years old, tens of thousands of years before that single exodus was supposed to happen. So either the dates were wrong or the story was incomplete. It turned out to be the story. Climate scientists studying ancient rainfall patterns found the missing piece. Imagine standing on ground that today is endless desert. Now erase the sand. Replace it with rivers, grasslands, elephants, and antelope drinking from lakes that no longer exist. For a few thousand years at a time, in what researchers now call Green Sahara episodes, the impossible became possible. Walking out of Africa wasn't a gamble across empty sand. It was a walk across savanna, following game animals and fresh water, the same way humans had always moved. The exodus wasn't one dramatic departure. It was several, opening and closing with the rhythm of the climate itself, most of them ending in extinction, except the one that didn't. That single successful line changed everything downstream, and this is where the story turns from archaeology into something closer to detective work written in our own DNA. In 1987, geneticists studying a particular kind of DNA passed only through mothers found something remarkable. Every non-African population on Earth traced back to a strikingly small founding group. Later genome sequencing sharpened the picture further. The ancestors who left Africa appear to have numbered only in the low thousands, a population that small should have been fragile. Instead, within tens of thousands of years, their descendants had reached Australia, Siberia, and eventually the Americas. A handful of survivors on a near-empty continent became the ancestors of nearly 8 billion people. But leaving Africa didn't mean walking into an empty world. It meant walking into someone else's. Neanderthals had already been living across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, superbly adapted to cold, forested, unfamiliar terrain that these new arrivals knew nothing about. For a long time, the assumption was conflict or simple replacement, one species outcompeting another until only one remained. Then, in 2010, paleogeneticist Svante Pääbo and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute sequenced the Neanderthal genome and found something almost nobody expected. Living non-African humans carry Neanderthal DNA. Not metaphorically, literally, measurably, roughly 1 to 2% of the genome in most people whose ancestry traces outside Africa. The two populations hadn't simply competed. They had met and in some cases, formed families. And the surprises didn't stop there. Genetic studies of populations in Papua New Guinea and parts of Southeast Asia revealed DNA from an entirely different, previously unknown group, the Denisovans, identified initially from a single finger bone in a Siberian cave. Some Melanesian populations today carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry. The story of leaving Africa isn't really about one lonely migration into emptiness. It's about a species walking into a world already inhabited by cousins, and quietly, repeatedly, becoming part of them. None of this was inevitable, and none of it was easy. These migrations happened alongside genuine catastrophe. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supereruption in present-day Sumatra released one of the largest volcanic events in the last 2 million years, and some researchers have proposed it triggered a period of global cooling severe enough to crash human populations toward near extinction. That theory remains genuinely contested. Other evidence suggests some populations weathered the period with little disruption, but even without Toba, the broader picture is clear. This was migration under existential pressure, not exploration for its own sake. People leaving Africa were not adventurers in the way we might romanticize today. They were following the last viable path away from environments that could no longer support them. Popular retellings often compress all of this into a single heroic image. One brave band crossing a land bridge, changing history in one bold march. It's a satisfying story, and it isn't entirely wrong, but it flattens something more remarkable. The real picture, pieced together from fossils, ancient climate records, and DNA extracted from bones tens of thousands of years old, is messier and more human. Multiple failed attempts, a handful of successes, interbreeding with other human species, and long stretches of sheer environmental luck, all compressing into the ancestry now carried inside nearly every person outside Africa, every city you've ever seen, every language ever spoken, every civilization ever built, traces back to one impossible decision. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, a handful of people looked beyond the only world they'd ever known and kept walking. They weren't trying to change history, they were simply trying to survive. But without realizing it, they became the ancestors of almost everyone alive outside Africa today. In a very real sense, every journey humanity has ever taken since began with theirs.